Welcome to CPF Fire Wire, a podcast from California professional firefighters where we discuss a wide range of issues affecting firefighters, our unions, our families, and the communities we serve.
Hello, I'm Brian Rice, president of the California Professional Firefighters, and we're here with another edition of the CPF Fire Wire. Today, we're going to talk about preserving secure pensions for the men and women on the front lines. And this has been one of the most important fights that our unions have waged over the past several decades. And this month marks another milestone in that ongoing fight. A new court ruling has likely put in motion, I won't say once and for all because there's probably going to be an appeal, but it's put an end to Proposition B in San Diego's pension killing ordinance. And that decision caps nearly a decade of struggle by San Diego Firefighters Local 145 and other public workers to reverse that controversial pension proposition. And for those of you that don't remember, Proposition B ended secure pensions for most all city workers except police and switched them to a more or less a defined contribution without a line of duty death benefit. So there's a lot that we're going to cover here. But today we're specifically going to review that pension fight in San Diego, how the battle was formed, how it got to court and a court victory, how the firefighters led the charge to end Proposition B, and the wider implications of the measure for all of us in secured pensions across California. And it's just an honor today to join us on the podcast is Jesse Connor. Jesse is the president of San Diego Firefighters Local 145. Jesse, I just want to welcome you to the Firewire.
Thank you, President Rice. It's really my honor to be here, and I'm so excited to get to share some of our experience with firefighters across this state so that hopefully other folks can learn from some of the lessons that we've had to live through. And I'm now the fourth president here at Local 145 that has had to shoulder part of this burden. It's gone on so long. And so just the latest team member who's leading the fight down here, but we've got a lot of great folks doing a lot of great work, and I'm excited to talk about all of them.
Going back to really the pension wars and Proposition B, I think there's a lot of our members, Jesse, that don't even know what happened. Take us back to the beginning of Proposition B, how the ballot came to be, the controversy surrounding that really put us in this position today, how it got passed, and then really what were the implications? What did the members of Local 145 face the day that thing passed?
Our journey began probably 2011 unofficially when our then mayor, Jerry Sanders, and a couple of council members who had personal agendas at the time started drafting a pension reform initiative. They had competing plans, but ultimately worked out one plan that ended pensions for firefighters and all city employees with the exception of our police officers on a go-forward basis. And then instead of meeting and conferring with the labor unions in the city, and in the city of San Diego, we have 6 labor unions, 5 were impacted. They kind of did an end around and they started marketing it as a voter initiative or a citizen pension reform initiative under the guise that if they did it through the will of the voters, that they could avoid their obligation to meet and confer under the Myers-Milius-Brown Act. And that was really the basis of why this thing became a problem. It did pass a majority vote in 2012 and effectively ended any defined benefit pension for, as I said, all city employees, including firefighters, from January 20th of 2012, or excuse me, July 20th, 2012 on. And so as of today, about 40% of our firefighters are not in a defined benefit pension system. They have a 401k style benefit, which is very similar to a 401k. Just a couple of differences that we don't need to get lost in those details, but it effectively means that the city will match 11% of an employee's base wage into this account, and that's all they get. And so that became a problem because it eliminated some benefits that firefighters really rely on. And the primary is death and disability. A lot of people don't know, but if you are injured in the course and scope of your duties or killed, generally speaking, employers pay an ongoing disability benefit for the rest of your life if you can't continue working, or to your dependents if you're killed in the line of duty. And that's important for firefighters who risk their lives. They need that reassurance. We don't ever want to create doubt in the minds of firefighters or police officers and have them hesitate taking swift action under the event of an emergency. And that's really what it did. We started seeing that we have a fire crew of 4 people down here. 2 of them have death and disability benefits and 2 do not. And yet they're going on the same traffic accidents on the freeway. They're going into the same fires, everything. And it became a huge concern. And so that was one big thing. The other thing that you alluded to earlier is absolutely correct. And that's pension security or retirement security. We give our lives and our bodies and our health in public service throughout the course of our career. Very few firefighters retire and say, hey, you know what, I'm injury free. I feel great. I'm going to go enjoy life. I would say the majority of our firefighters leave the job after, surgeries, shoulders, backs, knees, ankles, hip replacements. We break our bodies for years.
And that's what I'm really hoping that our listeners, especially the young ones, understand why the pension is so important. It's not just the pension. There are other things that come with that protect your family and your spouse. And that's a big one, Jesse. And didn't mean to interrupt you, but it was like I wanted to really hammer that point to our members on what was lost and what's being fought for.
You're absolutely right, and I couldn't have said it better. But it's the ripple effect of what goes with the pension. It's not a singular issue that it was represented as to the voters. And so, all of that said, the city, instead of negotiating with us on some reform measures, they represented this initiative to the public. They used their official positions as mayor and council members to sell it. And then when it was passed, they said, well, it wasn't a city initiative, it was a citizen initiative. And who are we as the city to get in the way of the voter will? And so really, I know Proposition B has become synonymous with pension reform, but really it's a lawsuit based off of respect for the law. And the city violated the law in how they implemented Proposition B. Pension reform, despite what we think, is not illegal. But how the city of San Diego implemented pension reform in this city was absolutely illegal. Not my words, but the words of the California Supreme Court in 2019.
Kind of dissect that just a little bit more for us as Sanders and I'll just say it, some of his cronies were designing this and bringing it to the public, and then how they painted it to the public versus what it truly was.
We had competing ballot measures at the time that were being worked on by different factions, and all of them were unfortunately incredibly fiscally conservative to the point of their own detriment. And so there was a lot of backdoor deals. They ultimately realized that multiple initiatives would surely confuse the voters and would fail, and so they landed on one, and that's Proposition B, which you see, and yes, they went out then and represented it using the official positions that they occupied. And so, you had Mayor Sanders at the time taking interviews and introducing himself as Mayor Sanders, standing in front of the city seal, using his chief of staff to organize meetings, using campaign contributions to fund these political activities. And if he had done all of that as Jerry Sanders, of course, we all maintain our individual rights to participate in politics when we're off duty. But the minute you corrupt the process by using your official position, you've essentially put your thumb on the scale. And now you're not saying that I, as a private citizen, am endorsing this. You're saying that, hey, as the leader of this city, I'm endorsing this. And so for folks who maybe don't take the time to educate themselves or are misled, given partial facts, they trust their leaders, right? We generally want to trust the people who we've elected to represent us. And so they say, well, I don't really know about this, but I'm going to vote for it because the mayor told me that he's endorsing this, and that's a good thing. And so we didn't just have it with the mayor. We had it with Councilmember Carl DeMaio at the time, who, again, he contrived a problem, gave partial facts to the voters, and then came up with his own solution. Right. And so to us, that wasn't a respectful way of representing the ballot measure. And then you also had the city attorney gave their ruling and said, no, what Mayor Sanders is doing is appropriate. There's no conflict of interest here. Right. And so we all know that you could have 10 attorneys in a room and you're probably going to get 10 different opinions. And so at the end of the day, it's just a legal opinion. But in this case, it's the legal opinion that the city relied on, and it was wrong. And now multiple courts have confirmed that it was wrong. And so fortunately, we do have a new city attorney who respects the law and has since guided the city after numerous court decisions to say, hey, we should rethink our position on this because the California Supreme Court was very clear that we violated the law. So Jerry Sanders is and his team ultimately got enough signatures, got support for this ballot initiative back in 2012, and they got it placed on the ballot. And it was ultimately successful. Unfortunately, the voter turnout wasn't great. I know that it's constantly represented as 65% of San Diego voters approve this thing, right? And you're thinking, well, wow, that's overwhelming majority. The unfortunate part is it was such a low turnout for that election. I think the totals were around 230,000 people turned out to vote in a city of 1.4 million.
Talk to us a little bit about what Local 145 leadership and members did during that campaign to try to defeat it.
Our union put forth great effort to try to educate the public and the voters on what this thing really was. And you know, it's sometimes people ask me, well, clearly this thing passed. So what did Local 145 do wrong? And I say, well, that's not really a fair question because we can look back and you know, it's always hindsight's always 20/20, and we can always say, well, we could have done more. But at the time, I will tell you, the leadership of Local 145 worked tremendously hard, and they were out there campaigning and you know, spending money to advertise and doing all of the same things that all of our firefighters are familiar with during campaign season. But we came up short, and you know, we could split hairs over, did we do enough or what more could we have done? Clearly, we now know that it was a very real threat. We've paid dearly for it. And that's part of why I love this podcast, because we've got to get ahead of this in cities where it hasn't happened yet or it's on the horizon. And we have to say, don't take these threats, you know, sitting down. Throw everything at it, because in the long run, it's going to be less expensive and less time consuming.
And I'm with you on that. You can hindsight and 2020 guess this so much. If I was going to do anything, and you and I have had this conversation, as long as I'm president of CPF, we will not, as much as possible, allow a local to find themselves in that. And they may find themselves in that position. We will be present because it affects everyone. And then I think that's one that members need to understand, because I was a Local 522 president. I was friends with Ron, with Alan, with Frank, and watched this battle and watched what Local 145 did. And I could look at it and say, my hat's actually off, because the battle they were fighting for the vote was, and they knew in their mind, they knew legally it was illegal, but they couldn't just, you can't just blow everything up. You got to follow the process. And if you guys didn't follow that process, you could have gotten blown out of court. And so it's so technical, and you've got to do everything right. And that for me has been one of the fascinating things with Local 145 is the length of this battle, and the way that you guys conducted yourself and the way that you got business done. This was not an easy road. This was hard.
This was actually two separate court cases. The first one, we started with a ULP, an unfair labor practice charge, and we sent that, as most of our listeners probably know, to PERB, the Public Employee Relations Board, because they were set up as a quasi-judicial agency outside of the Superior Court level to handle these types of cases. Well, PERB ruled in our favor. That decision was appealed by the city to the 4th District Court of Appeals, and they overturned PERB's decision and said, no, PERB got it wrong, so we're not even going to rule on the remedy part of what PERB suggested. Well, then we appealed that to the California Supreme Court. The California Supreme Court said, no, 4th District Court of Appeals, you got it wrong. And PERB is entitled to deference because this is their specialty. And it's like in football. The ruling on the field stands unless it was so egregious that there's conclusive evidence to overturn. And so the California Supreme Court said they remanded or sent the case back to the 4th District saying, you got it wrong, so we're overturning that, but now you have to rule on the remedy. The 4th District Court of Appeals then ruled on the remedy. The remedy was a bit subjective, but it suggested that although the initiative itself was illegal or implemented illegally, the initiative was not illegal. And so we essentially have a law on the books that has no force and effect. Well, how does that work? It really doesn't. So we had to go to a second court case called a quo warranto process. To get a quo warranto, which is striking down a voter-improved ballot initiative, that's a big deal in the state of California because we want to protect the will of the voters. And so we were required to get approval from the Attorney General, Xavier Becerra. We made our case to him. He approved the quo warranto process to go forward. And so we refiled at the Superior Court level now that quo warranto. And so the decision that we most recently received earlier this month is a ruling in our favor for the quo warranto in Superior Court, meaning the whole proposition should be thrown out. Now we'll have about 60 days, both sides will have about 60 days to appeal that. And we're suspicious and expecting that it will likely be appealed by the proponents of the initiative now to the 4th District Court of Appeals. So it's really a waiting game, but it was a huge victory. It's something that's so infrequently exercised in the state of California that most people don't know what a quo warranto is.
Talk to us about the kind of stresses that each of you faced, your executive board, your members, because I know that there's no way it didn't have an effect on your local and your leadership, and like to hear about it.
No union out there, regardless of size, can do any of this on their own. We really need to engage one another. And in 2012, excuse me, we did have the involvement of other locals, folks coming out, donating money for PAC contributions, things like that. And that was important to us. And that's why we now want to give back and help other locals who may be facing the same circumstances. But it's tremendous stress. It's stressful knowing that there is this giant problem laying out there and you're kind of relegated to waiting on the court system, waiting on the process. We always knew that we would get our day to tell our side, that we would always get to represent the facts and not the people who had the cameras at the time, what they were saying. But we had to wait. And I appreciate the work that courts do, but they are backed up and each level, when it gets appealed higher and higher, it's a waiting game, right? The California Supreme Court didn't even have to take the case. They had to review it to see if it actually met their criteria. And so all of that was stressful because we're spending, at this point, we have spent probably the four unions, we've spent probably about $1.4 million fighting this thing, unpacking this. And so you're constantly spending member funds to defeat this. And there were times over the last 7 years where you kind of think, would it be easier just to ask the city to negotiate and take lesser of a benefit than we're entitled to? Are the courts ultimately going to rule against us? And this was all for naught. These stressors are constantly going through your mind, and any union leader out there, knows what I'm talking about, because at the end of the day, we all want to do the best for our members. And sometimes you're in a situation where you almost lose sight of, what is the best. But when we do that, we regroup locally, we reach out to our attorneys, we reach out to the members for feedback, and everybody, despite the journey, everybody kept saying, keep fighting. This was wrong. We are morally right. We are legally right. The voters were misled, and it's been a detriment to public safety in this city, and that's intolerable. And so we kept fighting. But individually, to the member level, this was a huge stressor, because, as I've already alluded to, we have company officers out there now that were ordering people, firefighters, into harm's way, knowing that they didn't have a death and disability benefit. We had, for years, we've always been taught on how to manage finances or what to do with our 401k by the folks who came before us. But we saw a divide. And now, senior folks in the fire stations didn't know how to talk to our younger folks in those defined contribution plans, because the benefit levels were structured so different. And so there was a breakdown in that historical knowledge. And then, we became way less competitive as a fire department. We're the second largest city in California, and I think 8th largest in the United States. But we were losing people to small cities that border our jurisdiction, because we can't offer the pay and benefits to compete. We're the only major fire department in the state of California to not offer a pension. And then we lost pace with some of our other benefits. And so if you want to be a firefighter, why would you come here to San Diego? And we were, unfortunately losing that battle. So it was stressful, and it continues to be stressful. Every time we get a win in the courts, it's a ray of hope. And we say, hey, the horizon's just ahead. Keep fighting.
See, talk to me a little bit about, while all this is going on, you guys were still incredibly active at the city council level. You kept going, and got to providing the members that are under the 401k style pension with a death and disability protection. That one, I don't want to lose that in this conversation, because that's another very key piece of this that's going to play out in the end, and political action and what the payoff was for that.
Certainly. Well, I know it's hard to remain emotionless when you're facing challenges, especially as a membership or a union. But really, that would be my advice. Yes, we have Proposition B, and it's a huge impact, probably our number one fight going on. But we can't lose sight of everything else. And we some of our members get frustrated because they feel that politicians have not been honest with us and have, therefore perpetuated problems like this. And so they say, well, why are we involved in politics? We shouldn't even be supporting candidates. We shouldn't be having conversations. And what we remind them is, no, we have to continue having conversations, because we have to prevent stuff like this. Are we always going to get our way? Are politicians always going to understand our viewpoints? No, it would be ludicrous to think that would happen. But we have to try. And politics is all about relationships. And the commitment that I made to every politician, including the ones who openly attacked unions, I said, I will only provide you with facts. I will never make a statement that I cannot back up. And so, I wanted to establish that I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be fair. We also made a commitment to our political folks that we would never do character assassinations unless we are attacked. And so we can disagree with a politician, but I still want to take every opportunity that I can to have a conversation. And through those conversations, we're enlightened with different perspectives, and then we can go back and we can make our arguments stronger. But we also have the opportunity to educate folks who maybe aren't aware of some things. And as exciting as pensions and actuarial valuations and fiscal impact reports are, I'll tell you that a lot of council members don't have the time to dig into these things. And so they rely on their staffers. And so as Local 145, I wanted to be a resource for their staffers and be able to provide them with credible information that they can make their bosses look good. And so our team has worked really hard to restore some broken relationships and pursue new ones. And we got involved with every candidate. And if they were not the best for public safety, then we got involved with the election and we backed their opponent. We spent money, we walked districts, we gave our endorsement. We just did the last election series, some online campaigning and activities, which were pretty cool. We leveraged technology. We were geofencing neighborhoods and sending out targeted, mailers. It's phenomenal, but we have to, because if we want fair leaders who respect public safety and listen, they may not agree with us, but we want them to listen. Then we have to be an active part of that process. And we went from a 5-4 council majority who supported labor and a not so friendly mayor, a not so friendly city attorney, to now having an 8-1 labor friendly city council, a mayor who respects labor, a city attorney who respects labor. And I know those folks are occasionally attacked because they say, well, you're in the union's pockets. That is absolutely not true, right? I would love if that was even possible, but that's not how the world works. What they are is they're willing to sit down and have a conversation. I can pick up the phone and I can say, I understand your perspective, but will you hear mine? And they'll give us that time. And so, yes, we've been very effective at being part of the discussions as we move forward. And that's shown through some of the support that we've had recently. So long answer to your question, I know, but that kind of leads me up to how we got death and disability back. When I took office as president, it had been 6 years since we were promised a death and disability benefit, but the city still had not implemented one. And I was at the table for some of those frustrating talks. The city sent it out to an RFP process twice, and then they tried to get SD-SERS, which is our local pension system, to only fund the component for death and disability while not funding pensions. And none of those were good choices financially. The city found out that it is cost prohibitive to insure 1,000 firefighters, right? Even though they thought that they could get better rates on the open market through private businesses, what they found out is we generally have a high risk occupation and it's pretty expensive to do so. And so the pension was actually the cheapest way to go about it. And so with this knowledge, I worked with the IFF Pension Resource Department through our DVP at the time, Frank Lima, and we got some access to some computer modeling technology that allowed us to show what the likes and differences were for costing. And then we actually came up with a creative way to fund a death and disability benefit on the go forward. And that's not pay a third party company, because you're losing that money. You're out that. It's profit. Our city self-funds workers' comp because it's a cheaper way for the city to do business. And so we said, well, let's add the death and disability component to the already existing risk pool and self-fund. In that case, it's been 6 years and we haven't had a death and disability. So the city's costs would have been zero, right? You don't incur costs as an employer until there's actually a death or a disability. And then it's negligible because it's, absorbed by the pool. And so that's what we did. Myself, my vice president, George Duardo, our secretary treasurer at the time, Brian Bone, we made the rounds and knocked on doors and scheduled meetings with staffers. And we saw that there were some bites. Some people wanted to know more, and that led to follow-up meetings, and other people kind of blew us off. But we just kept on it. And that was our number one issue with everything else going on. So we hammered it. Day after day, we'd probably meet twice a month with somebody. And it took us a year and a half. But ultimately, we believed we had enough votes on council, and we got it pushed to closed session, open session. And then, and this is the best part, and I think there's a picture somewhere on our website. We actually had over 50 of our firefighters show up, in our red T-shirts. And we filled the council chambers.
Jesse, one of the things as we close up is a look going forward. And I kind of want to be careful here because I know that you spoke of remedy and that discussion is in the court. What I don't want to do is compromise anything that Local 145 is doing. But what, as far as you're willing to go at the moment, what do you see in the future for the members of 145 and specifically the members that are under the 401 type pension? How do you see this thing resolving as far as you're comfortable in going? Because I can already see there's a part two to this.
Certainly. And clearly there's on the go forward, if this thing's successful, our goal is to get everybody back into a pension system that they should have been in all along. That's an easy one, but there are some complexities with unpacking the folks who now have this tiered benefit and have contributed money to this 401k style. And so there's a lot of questions that are on the table and will have to be worked out through a meet and confer process as to how do we treat those folks. Do we allow them to purchase the missed pension credits with that money that they've contributed to this other plan? Are they allowed to make a decision to keep it? Do we force everybody back historically into a pension? And I don't think that I even have that answer today, but we're absolutely considering all of those different possibilities so that we can be prepared to unpack this thing when it comes time. And then, unfortunately, we do have a lot of folks who have left the city, which further complicates it because a 401A is portable. They've accrued a benefit and went to a different city, and now they may be reading about a ruling that ruled that original benefit illegal. So yes, we're more than willing to work through it. As compared to everything else we've been through, that seems like the least of our troubles.
I'll just say it, Jesse. I'm super proud of you, every past leader of Local 145, your leadership and your membership for the tenacity to stick this one out. And so I'm going to, if you have some closing remarks, there's so many questions I want to ask, but if you can leave us with a couple of closing remarks, I would love that.
For sure. And thank you for those kind remarks. We appreciate your leadership at the state as well. And I'm going to circle back to where we started, and that's what you're doing. How do we help other people not go through this, right? How do we avoid it? And so just a couple of pieces of advice for union officers out there: know your rights. The most important part is issue spotting. If you don't know your rights are being violated, then how do you protect your members? And if you're a small local, reach out to those around you. You have resources up and down this state, all the way up to CPF, IFF. You've got good people with experience, and that has been a key to our success. We look to others who have gone through some of this stuff. Take all threats serious, and spend the money up front if there's any question as to how big it could be, because I will tell you, you will save money and time and stress in the long run. And then I want to give just a shout out reminder to all the members out there. Answer that call when your union board says we need your help. Because if we would have put 900 of our members out there, boots on the ground, campaigning, we could have, I don't know for sure, but we could have, gone down a different path with this thing. So please be involved with your union and listen to their guidance, because it's generally coming from attorneys and experienced folks that they're talking to. And then last point that I'll say is get involved politically. You cannot live in a vacuum and believe that we're somehow above, beneath, or outside of politics. Everything is political. And make sure you establish those relationships. Even when you were wronged by a politician, reach out and have a conversation. You may only agree on 2 of 10 things, but that's 2 victories. And if you find those politicians that agree 8 of 10, great. But if you don't get involved, you're going to get 0 of 10. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We are humbled to be part of this. Really respect the leadership of the state, you, Mike, the whole team up there, and we look forward to talking again.
Jesse, I just can't say it enough. Honored to have you on here. Men and women that you've been listening, this has been President Jesse Connor, Local 145, San Diego Firefighters, reviewing the pension battle of almost the last decade. Jesse, thank you for your time. This is Brian Rice, President of the California Professional Firefighters, signing off on the Firewire.
You can find CPF Fire Wire at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. You can also find CPF Fire Wire at the CPF website, www.cpf.org, and on the CPF YouTube page. We're always interested in getting your feedback, comments, and criticism. Tell us what you'd like to hear about. Drop us a line, info@cpf.org. CPF Firewire is a production of California Professional Firefighters. Our producer is Carol Wills. Our engineer is Matt McDermott. Please join us next month for another edition of CPF Firewire.